Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short bringing to you another episode of our program that deals with Christianity and a topic that is in the news and how to think about it from a Christian biblical worldview. I recently ran across an reenactment of the Columbine shooting. I don't know if you remember where you were when that took place. I remember exactly where I was. I was in a hotel room in Las Vegas, had gone out there for a trade show. And my dad and I went out there to the National Association of Broadcasters convention and turned on the TV. And here was this report that there were two boys that had killed, I think it was 13 kids at Columbine High School outside of Denver, Colorado. And it was a massacre, and these two boys had gone on a rampage, shooting rampage. And that was really, it stunned the whole nation. I remember it very vividly. And I just recently saw a reenactment of that whole situation. And they showed the Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris, I believe their names were, and they would go in and methodically shoot people and then set their guns down and sometimes and reload and go into their backpack and take their own sweet time and just methodically go through there and try to kill as many people as they could. And what struck me when I saw this reenactment of the Columbine massacre is, why didn't any of those boys, why didn't any of those students, especially the older ones, here you have an 18-year-old, 17-year-old in high school. Now, if you're 18-year-old and you're in high school, you're a man. You're legally an adult in a high school. And there are quite a number of 18-year-old legal adults that attend their last year of high school. They're seniors in high school. And so, of course, the vast majority of students will be under 18. There will be a number of 18-year-olds in the high school at the time, and then you'll get more percentage that are 17-year-old. Probably quite a few boys in that high school were 17-year-olds, and then you get even a vast more number of 16-year-old boys, and on down the age group to 15, say. And even 14 you would have in that category in that high school. So you had boys ranging from, say, 14 years old all the way up to 18. There might have even been some 19-year-olds. If a kid had been held back for a year or wasn't able to graduate with his class because he needed some more credits or whatever, there might have even been a 19-year-old in the high school or some 19-year-olds. And of course, there would have been adult teachers, phys ed teachers, all kinds of adults ranging in their 20s and 30s and 40s, even their 50s, 60s. So you had a wide variety of people in that building at that time while this was all taking place. And they were evidently following the wisdom that is taught to them by the safety officers at schools. And this has been the standard protocol. It's called run, hide, fight. So if you can, you try to run away. If you have to stay there, you fight, or you have to hide, excuse me. And then, if necessary, fight. But it seems like in this reenactment, and I think this is based on very accurate and realistic descriptions of what actually took place, most of the students were hiding behind desks. They were hiding behind doors. They were hiding behind cabinets. They were trying to get out of sight when this shooting started taking place. Some of them did make it out of the building. They were running out of the building when they heard the shots fired, and they escaped and were free and were able to get to safety. There were hardly anyone that I'm aware of who actually tried to fight, who actually tried to charge these boys or run up to them or push them down or grab the gun away from them or resist or struggle in any way. And I thought, this is very strange. And I thought to myself, this is probably more a product of the modern times that we live in than anything else, because my mind goes back to 50 years ago, 100 years ago in this nation. If you had a situation like that where you had two boys, only two, and they had weapons, no doubt, but they were talking between themselves, they were walking slowly, they were reloading their guns. There were times when the shooting stopped and that they would put down their backpacks and open their backpacks, and there were many, many opportunities. If there had been people who wanted to fight them, to resist them, to engage them, and in some strategic way. Of course, you don't just run up to somebody with a gun in his hand and expect to try to fight him with your fists or even with a knife. As they say, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. Yeah, there's definitely that wisdom to follow. You don't want to try to challenge someone if they have a gun and they have the ability to kill you, unless you have a gun and you can fire back, and that's what the police would ideally do. But even if you don't have a gun, you would think that there would be boys and even men, faculty members, staff, administrators, guys that know that their duty in those situations is to try to save those students. You would think that they would try to come up with a plan to rush the shooters, to sneak up on them, to tackle them when their back is turned, throw something at them, distract them, fight them. But that was not the case. What happened at Columbine was everyone was either running or hiding. And so it's just a matter of time before these two killers were able to just walk around casually. They had no resistance, hardly at all. I don't know of any resistance that they encountered. I didn't hear of any scuffle or fight or wrestling match that any of the high school boys or any of the faculty members engaged with these killers. And I thought, that is so odd. Why is it that in seeing this reenactment of the Columbine killing, that there wasn't more, at least an attempt to engage these killers and try to stop them? Why weren't there boys who were storming these killers? Why didn't they get together and say, look, they're going to come by and kill us one by one if we don't do something? And so all at once, somebody says, storm them, take them out. And everybody starts running toward these guys and knock them down on the ground and grab the guns from them. You have to remember, there were, hundreds of students in that building? And corporately, if all of them had decided that they were going to take out these two killers, just two, they were, and they weren't special ops, they weren't military trained, they were just students themselves, they were just big overgrown kids themselves, and they had no special training in self-defense, or they probably weren't that great of marksmen, even though they had practiced. We have videos showing them that they had been practicing shooting and all kinds of stuff. So they knew something about the weapons, they knew how to use them, and they had a better than average ability to shoot them. But if all of those students, at least the boys, had rushed them and had taken away or threw things at them all at once, started throwing books at them and started throwing objects at them and just pummeling them with things, yeah, there'd be a lot, there would have been some of the boys definitely killed or shot or seriously injured or whatever, but still you have numbers on the side of the students. And it struck me as so odd that in our modern times, uh, the high school boys especially are so passive, they're so weak, they're so, you might even say, cowardly. Now you can't blame kids in this situation for their situation because they're not raised on farms. They're not expected to be responsible adults at early age. In fact, the age of adolescence keeps going further and further into the 20s. So you have college, and these high school boys go into college, and then they're just as big a goof-offs in college. They're not acting like responsible adults. They're not taking on the responsibilities of making a living and raising a family. You have to remember, it was only just maybe 100 years ago in this country, even maybe 75 years ago, that a boy who is 15, 16 years old, out west in the 1800s or so, especially, that a 15 or 16-year-old boy might be married and raising a family at age 16. And definitely by 17 and 18, a lot of these farm boys had a family of their own. They had a home of their own, and they were working the fields and earning a living for their families. And so, vastly different time. If you look at the situation at the Revolutionary War, a lot of the soldiers that fought in the Revolutionary War were teenagers. You look in the Civil War, and a lot of the soldiers that fought in Civil War in the 1800s were teenagers. And many of them were married, and many of them were making a living all at the time now that we have teenagers, boys in high school, and then they go to college now, still playing almost like they're adolescents. They don't see themselves as responsible, and oftentimes, even into their late 20s, they're still not acting like very responsible adults. So we've sort of infantilized a lot of our young men, and it's not their fault necessarily that they're not ready to be adults, and they're lacking a lot of the confidence and ability to act like an adult. But it struck me that here you have two shooters in Columbine, and you have hundreds of students, and you have hundreds of boys who are, it's not a grade school. We're not talking about little children here. We're talking about young people, and some of them are young adults. And while you don't have a whole lot of faculty and administrative men in the school, you have quite a bit of men and faculty males, but not a whole population like you do have the students. And these young men, in an earlier age, 100 years ago, they definitely wouldn't have let these two fellow students walk systematically from room to room, person to person, and shoot people without storming them, without rushing them, without at least putting up a fight to try to stop them. These boys that were behind the desks and behind the cabinets and or running away would have faced these killers and tried to do something about it and tried to stop them. And I blame the inability for the young men in there. Now, I don't want to make them feel guilty, because it's not them They didn't cause this situation, but it's the way they were raised. It's the way our culture treats young adult men. They're treated as if they're still children. They're treated as if they're still irresponsible. They're not seen as adults that really have to get out there and be responsible and make responsible choices and take their place in the world. We're, again, like I mentioned before, we're extending this adolescent period way, way too far. And these boys at Columbine, by letting these two killers just wander freely from room to room and go from person to person and shoot them without taking action, that's just a symptom of our times. And in an earlier time, there is no question that these men, these young men, these boys, older boys, would have done something to try to stop those killers. They would have known how to do something. See, in the older days, a lot of the boys in the United States knew how to fire a gun, and they knew how to position themselves to defend themselves. They knew how to fight. They had to fight off animals out in the wilderness. They had to deal with cougars and bears and wolves and coyotes. And they, in an earlier time, they actually had to be able to defend the family along with the father against Indians and attacks of any kind, robbers on the road. If you have a home out in the middle of the wilderness and there's the law is like an hour or two away and the police, sheriff is in town a couple hours away, you have to be able to handle yourself. And the fathers taught their boys how to handle themselves. And when the fathers left to get supplies in town, they would tell their teenage boys, even 12-year-old, 13-year-olds, you're going to have to look out for your mother and your sisters here while I'm gone. And the boys took that responsibility, and they trained their boys how to do that. They trained them how to shoot. They trained them how to go out and hunt rabbit and deer and how to start a fire and cook and clean the animals and how to do the gardening and how to put in a farm and all kinds of stuff. They were learning at an earlier age. Instead of playing the video games and watching TV and goofing around on their computers, they were actually learning the life skills that would help them later in life as men. That is not the case today. And one of the problems with this adolescent culture, this teen culture, is that they're not taught responsibility. And one of the responsibilities of an adult is that you protect people. You protect the women and children. You protect the weak or the less strong or the vulnerable or those who look to you for protection. And that's what struck me with this reenactment of Columbine is here were these two killers, these fellow students, Klebold and Harris, and they were just walking methodically along and stopping, talking between themselves, reloading, setting down their backpacks, reaching in their backpacks, getting their ammunition, setting their guns down on the table, laughing, talking, doing all kinds of things that gave the other students opportunity to rush them, to do something, to make something happen. And instead, they were hiding out behind these tables and chairs and cabinets like they were afraid, instead of the guys, at least, instead of thinking, hey, I kind of have a duty to do something. I need to step up and do something and not just run away and run out of the window and try to get away. How about try to save somebody's life? How about try to save your fellow students? We didn't see that. Now, it's also a bigger part of a problem that is not just the teenagers and the young boys who were just sort of sitting and cowering behind the cabinets and tables. we've seen recently in these school shootings where when the police show up, oftentimes these police act like they're too afraid to try to take action. And we saw this at other shootings, school shootings, where the officer comes over there and he hears gunshots and he's too afraid to go in because he might get shot. He might get killed. It's dangerous in there. And so there's shooting going on in the school. He has a gun and he's cowering outside the door waiting for backup. And it's like, you don't have to be a Rambo. You don't have to go in there with guns blazing and just march right in the room and start shooting and everything. You don't have to do that, but you have to do something better than just sit outside the school while these shots are ringing out and students are dying. You with a gun, and you're too afraid to go in, and you're waiting for backup. You're waiting for the cavalry to come in, and they're not there. It's your responsibility. And so these policemen who were criticized for waiting for backup when they should have been in there trying to do their best. Now, yeah, you go into a school where there are shooters in there, it's a very dangerous situation and you risk a lot. You might die, you might get injured, they might kill you. But yeah, that's part of it. But that's what one of the reasons and purposes that God made men is to be responsible and to take those risks, and especially police officers. Because if you're a police officer, you have decided that you're willing to take those risks. You're willing to poke your nose into dangerous situations. You're willing to charge in where a normal citizen might not feel obligated. You are obligating yourself to go in there. And so it really sickened us in more recent shootings to see the police officers and safety officers that carried a gun who wouldn't even go in the school because they were afraid that they might get hurt. That should not be their first consideration. Their first consideration is, how can I help stop this killing? And if I can go in there and draw some fire, that means students are not having fire drawn upon them. If I can go in there and cause confusion, if I can take one of them out, or if I can take them both out, it's worth the risk to my life. And boom, you go in there. And there shouldn't be any question with the police. But with these young men who were in the school, there should have also been the idea that, hey, I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to just cower behind this desk. I'm not just going to think about my own safety. I'm going to try to do what I can to save lives. Now, there were some faculty members, brave faculty members, who did risk their lives and were killed in the process of trying to get students into a safer environment. And that is good. That really inspires us and really gives us hope for our society when you see brave faculty members. And there were some teachers, I don't remember the names of the teachers, but there were some men who did try to act heroically. But it's a situation sort of like on the 9/11 flight that was supposedly headed for Washington, D.C., and the people on the plane, the men on the plane, realized that this flight had been hijacked, and it was the plane that the Scott Beamer and his people on the plane, they decided to rush at the attackers, and there were more passengers than there were hijackers. So what do? You just sit back in your seat and stay put the way the hijackers tell you to do? Or do you say, look, there are more of us than them. We're going to come up with a plan and we're going to take them out. Now, we might not live and it might bring the plane down, but at least we're going to save lives in their target, whatever target they were targeting. I think it was they were trying to possibly take out the White House or the Capitol. They had some high-profile target that they were trying to aim the plane at, these hijackers, and the passengers, the men, got together and said, no, we're not going to stand for that. We're not going to sit here like cowards in our seat doing what we're told by these hijackers. We're going to storm them. We're going to take action. We're going to come up with a plan, and we're going to try to do all that we can do. Well, those were adults. They were not teenagers, and they were not 17 and 18-year-olds, but you would have hoped that there could have been some boys in that Columbine situation that they would have said, look, we're going to try to stop these guys, especially some of the athletes. Where were the athletes? Where were the football players? Where were the track and field players? Where were the basketball players? Where were the baseball players? Where were the athletes of Columbine? Were they just simply trying to hide behind the desks and hide behind the doors and file cabinets and do the, or did they run away? Did they run out the doors? Were they trying to escape the situation? Or were there some that actually said, no, let's figure out how to get these killers and stop them and tackle them. And if we all rush them, they can't stop us all. That requires not just a plan, but it requires courage. It requires the ability to think in terms of, hey, I will sacrifice myself for the good of the group here. I want to take these killers out. And what about trying to grab the gun away from them and kill them, or not grab the gun away, just come up with them and shove them down and pin them down so they can't fire, and then jump on them and gang up on them and get about 5, 10, 15, 20 students, holding them down by actually just laying on top of them or sitting on top of them. When you have a lot of students in a school like this situation, you have to consider the fact that you outnumber the killers. Now, yes, they have bullets, they have guns, they have weapons that you don't have, but you have numbers. So even if you have one person with a gun or two people with a gun, you can still take them out by simply sheer numbers, overwhelming them. Because after all, again, they have to reload. They have to stop the shootings and put in a new cartridge in their automatic weapon, and they have to do these things. And you can also steal their weapons. You can take their weapons from them. You can do damage to them. And the point being that we have to begin to teach, especially the young men, to be responsible, to take chances, to think in terms of being protectors of the women and children, and not just individual selfish people trying to survive in the world themselves. And you can call it chivalry, you can call it whatever you want, but that's what we really need to have return to our country once again. We'll see you back next week on another edition of the program. God bless.